Welcome to One Book, One Coffee, where we dive into the world's most fascinating books one cup at a time. Today, you've chosen to explore The Art of War by Sun Tzu, a decision that sets you apart from the crowd. In a world of endless scrolling and binge-watching, you've opted for growth, for understanding strategies tested by time. It's a testament to your drive for self-improvement and curiosity about the timeless principles of leadership and strategy. The Art of War isn't just any book. It's a remarkable guide that has shaped military thinking, business strategies, and leadership for generations. From generals to CEOs, the insights within these pages have been endorsed by giants like General Patton and even found a place on the reading lists of contemporary leaders such as Elon Musk. Sun Tzu was an ancient Chinese general, strategist, and philosopher whose wisdom continues to echo through the ages. Compelled by the turbulent times he lived in, Sun Tzu crafted this masterpiece to offer a roadmap through the chaos of conflict and competition. His personal experiences in warfare and leadership gave birth to this book, translating hard-earned lessons into clear and enduring strategies. Now, a quick note before we dive in. This is a detailed, chapter-by-chapter walkthrough, so it's going to be a longer session. Take your time with it. There's no rush. If you need to step away, save this video to your watch later, or forward the link to yourself on WhatsApp, so you can pick up right where you left off. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's walk through this book together, chapter by chapter, idea by idea. Let's begin. Picture this. You're sitting across from me with a steaming cup of coffee, and I'm about to share something that could completely change how you think about competition, business, and life itself. We're diving into the very first chapter of Sun Tzu's The Art of War, a book written over 2,000 years ago that still sits on the desks of CEOs, coaches, and anyone who's ever faced a serious challenge. And here's the beautiful irony. This ancient Chinese general's first lesson isn't about fighting at all. It's about thinking. Sun Tzu opens with what might be the most important sentence in strategic thinking. All warfare is based on deception. Now, before you start imagining elaborate lies and schemes, let me pour you another cup and explain what he really means. He's talking about the art of misdirection, of making your opponent focus on the wrong things while you quietly position yourself for success. Think about it. When Apple was secretly developing the iPhone, they let everyone believe they were just a computer company. When Netflix started streaming, Blockbuster thought they were still in the DVD rental business. The most powerful moves happen when nobody sees them coming. But here's where Sun Tzu gets really fascinating. He insists that before you even think about competing, you need to do something that most people skip entirely. You need to plan. And not just any planning, but what he calls laying plans, based on 5 fundamental factors. It's like he's giving us a strategic GPS system for any competitive situation we might face. The first factor he mentions is what he calls the way. Essentially, does your cause align people behind a shared purpose? Now, think about this in your own life. Whether you're starting a business, leading a team, or even trying to get your family on board with a major decision, do people believe in what you're doing? Sun Tzu understood that technical superiority means nothing if people aren't emotionally invested. Look at how brands like Patagonia or Tesla don't just sell products, they sell missions that people want to be part of. Then comes heaven and earth, which sounds mystical but is actually incredibly practical. Heaven represents timing and external conditions you can't control, while earth represents the terrain and resources you're working with. In modern terms, this is about understanding market conditions and knowing your competitive landscape. When Airbnb launched during the 2008 financial crisis, they understood that people desperately needed extra income and cheaper travel options. They read both the timing and the terrain perfectly. The third factor is leadership. And here Sun Tzu reveals something profound about human nature. He says effective leaders embody 5 qualities: wisdom, trustworthiness, benevolence, courage, and strictness. Notice he doesn't say charisma or genius. He's talking about character traits that inspire genuine followership. Think about the leaders you actually respect, not just the ones who grab headlines. They probably demonstrate these exact qualities. Method and discipline make up the fourth factor, and this is where Sun Tzu shows his practical genius. He's talking about having systems, processes, and organization that work even when things get chaotic. Amazon's entire empire is built on this principle. They've systematized everything from warehouse operations to customer service so thoroughly that they can scale almost infinitely while maintaining consistency. The fifth factor is doctrine, essentially your rules of engagement and resource allocation. How do you make decisions? What are your non-negotiables? Modern companies call this their values or operating principles, but Sun Tzu understood that without clear doctrine, even the best strategies fall apart under pressure. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Sun Tzu says that whoever masters these 5 factors will win, and whoever doesn't will fail. But then he takes it a step further with something that sounds almost like a business consultant's checklist. He says you need to constantly assess which leader has more ability, which side has better conditions, which army is better trained, which side has clearer rewards and punishments, which force is stronger. What strikes me about this approach is how brutally honest it is. Sun Tzu isn't interested in wishful thinking or motivational speeches. He's saying that before you commit to any competitive situation, you need to do a clear-eyed assessment of reality. If you're honest about these factors, you'll know whether to fight, when to fight, and sometimes, most importantly, when not to fight at all. This connects to perhaps his most famous insight. Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. In business terms, this might mean solving a problem so elegantly that competition becomes irrelevant, or positioning yourself so strategically that others can't effectively compete with you. As we wrap up this first chapter, what strikes me most is how Sun Tzu treats planning not as a preliminary step, but as the foundation of everything else. He's essentially saying that most battles are won or lost long before they begin, in the quiet moments when someone takes the time to truly understand the situation they're facing. So, as you think about your own challenges, whether you're negotiating a deal, launching a project, or making any major life decision, remember, Sun Tzu's fundamental insight: the person who plans most thoroughly, who understands all the factors at play, and who moves with clear purpose will almost always prevail over someone with superior resources but inferior preparation. Picture this: you're sitting across from a friend who's about to make a major life decision. Maybe they're thinking about starting their own business or considering a career change that could uproot their entire family. What's the first question you'd ask them? Probably something like, have you really thought about what this is going to cost you? Not just in money, but in time, energy, relationships, and peace of mind. This is exactly the conversation Sun Tzu wants to have with us in his second chapter on waging war, but he's talking about something far more consequential than career moves. Now, think about this for a moment. When most people hear the art of war, they imagine ancient generals plotting elaborate battle strategies on dusty battlefields. But Sun Tzu is doing something much more sophisticated here. He's essentially saying, Before you even think about fighting, let's talk about whether you can afford to fight at all. It's like having a financial advisor for warfare, and the advice is surprisingly relevant whether you're running a company, navigating office politics, or even deciding how to handle that difficult conversation with your teenager. Sun Tzu opens this chapter with a stark reality check. War is expensive. Not just expensive in the way that buying a new car is expensive, but expensive in the way that it can bankrupt nations, destroy families, and leave societies picking up the pieces for generations. He talks about how a single day of warfare can consume the resources that took months or years to accumulate. Imagine if every argument you had with your spouse cost you a month's salary. You'd probably find yourself choosing your battles much more carefully, wouldn't you? Here's where it gets really interesting. Sun Tzu introduces this concept that the best victories are quick victories. He's not advocating for rushed decisions or hasty actions. Instead, he's pointing out something that anyone who's ever been in a prolonged conflict understands. The longer a fight drags on, the more it costs everyone involved. Think about those corporate restructuring processes that stretch on for months, creating anxiety and uncertainty throughout the organization. Or consider that couple you know who spent 3 years in an ugly divorce battle, spending tens of thousands on lawyers when they could have settled amicably in the beginning. The principle remains the same across centuries. But Sun Tzu goes deeper than just talking about speed. He introduces this fascinating idea about living off the enemy's resources. Now, before you start planning to raid your competitor's supply closet, let's think about what this really means in practical terms. It's about turning your opponent's strengths against them, or finding ways to make your challenges work in your favor. When Netflix was competing against Blockbuster, they didn't try to out-Blockbuster Blockbuster by building more physical stores. Instead, they used Blockbuster's own business model against them, making the convenience of physical stores seem outdated and cumbersome. The ancient strategist makes another point that's almost uncomfortable in its relevance to modern life. He talks about how prolonged conflicts weaken not just the armies involved, but the entire society supporting them. Resources get diverted from productive activities to destructive ones. People become focused on winning rather than building. Sound familiar? Think about those workplace feuds that consume entire departments, or political battles that paralyze governments while real problems go unsolved. Now, here's where Sun Tzu's thinking becomes almost prophetic. He argues that the wise leader understands that every conflict has ripple effects far beyond the immediate participants. When a company engages in a price war with its competitors, it's not just those companies that suffer. Suppliers get squeezed, employees face uncertainty, and customers often end up with lower quality products or services. The whole ecosystem feels the impact. One of the most powerful insights from this chapter is Sun Tzu's emphasis on knowing your own limitations before engaging in any conflict. He's essentially saying that self-awareness is your most important strategic asset. You need to understand not just what you can afford to lose, but what you can't afford not to win. This isn't about being pessimistic or avoiding all risks. It's about being brutally honest with yourself about your resources, your capabilities, and your staying power. Consider the entrepreneur who decides to take on Amazon in e-commerce without understanding the depth of Amazon's resources and commitment to that space. Or think about the small business owner who gets into a legal battle with a much larger competitor, not realizing that the larger company can afford to tie things up in court for years while the smaller business burns through its savings on legal fees. Sun Tzu would say these people failed to properly evaluate the costs and consequences before engaging. The chapter also touches on something that resonates deeply in our interconnected world: the idea that conflicts rarely stay contained. What starts as a small disagreement between two departments can spread throughout an organization. A trade dispute between two countries affects global supply chains. A family argument can strain relationships across multiple generations. As we wrap up this exploration of Sun Tzu's thoughts on waging war, the core message becomes clear. Whether you're facing a business challenge, a personal conflict, or any situation where you need to decide whether to engage or walk away, the ancient wisdom holds true. Count the cost first. Understand what victory really means and what defeat really costs. And remember that sometimes the most strategic move is choosing not to fight at all. In our next conversation, we'll explore how Sun Tzu approaches the actual planning and strategy once you've decided that a conflict is both necessary and winnable. Picture this. You're sitting across from a chess grandmaster, watching them study the board for what feels like an eternity before making a single move. Meanwhile, you're itching to just start capturing pieces left and right. But here's what that grandmaster knows that you don't yet. The game is won in the mind long before any pieces are captured. This is exactly what Sun Tzu understood over 2,000 years ago when he wrote about attack by stratagem. And it's a lesson that'll change how you think about every challenge in your life. Now, think about this for a moment. When most people hear the art of war, they imagine armies clashing on battlefields, swords ringing against shields, the chaos of combat. But Sun Tzu is about to flip that entire notion on its head. He's telling us that the highest skill in warfare, and by extension, in business, relationships, and life itself, isn't about fighting at all. It's about winning before the fight even begins. Sun Tzu opens this section with one of the most profound statements you'll ever encounter. To subdue the enemy without fighting is the supreme excellence. Let that sink in while you take another sip of your coffee. He's not talking about being passive or avoiding conflict altogether. He's talking about being so strategically brilliant, so well prepared, so thoroughly understanding of your situation that victory becomes inevitable without ever having to throw a punch. Think about the most successful people you know. Do they win through brute force, or do they win through preparation, timing, and understanding? Take someone like Warren Buffett in the investment world. He doesn't win by making frantic trades or following the crowd. He wins by doing his homework, understanding companies better than anyone else, and then making moves when the timing is perfect. That's attack by stratagem in action. But here's where Sun Tzu gets really practical. He breaks down warfare into different levels of skill, and this hierarchy is absolutely fascinating. The lowest skill, he says, is attacking fortified cities. Basically, going head-to-head against your opponent's strongest position. It's like trying to argue with someone who's already made up their mind, or attempting to break into a market where the competition is strongest. Sure, you might win eventually, but at what cost? The next level up is attacking armies in the field, engaging your opponent when they're prepared for battle but not in their strongest position. This is like competing directly with established businesses in their market space. You might succeed, but you're going to spend enormous resources and energy in the process. But the real mastery, according to Sun Tzu, lies in the top two levels. First, there's attacking your opponent's strategy, disrupting their plans before they can execute them. Think about how Netflix didn't just compete with Blockbuster by opening better video rental stores. They attacked Blockbuster's entire business model by making physical stores obsolete. They won by changing the game itself. And at the very pinnacle, attacking your opponent's alliances and relationships. This is about isolating your competition, building coalitions, and ensuring that when the crucial moment comes, you have all the support while they have none. It's like that colleague who always seems to get the best projects, They're not necessarily the most talented, but they've built relationships throughout the organization that support their success. Now, here's what makes this approach so powerful in our modern world. We live in an age of information warfare, don't we? The battles that matter most today are fought with data, with understanding market trends, with knowing your customers better than your competitors do. Sun Tzu's emphasis on intelligence gathering feels incredibly relevant when you consider how companies like Amazon use data to anticipate what you want before you even know you want it. But let's bring this down to a personal level, because that's where this wisdom really shines. How often do you find yourself in conflicts that could have been avoided entirely with better preparation? Maybe it's a difficult conversation with your boss that goes sideways because you didn't understand their priorities. Or perhaps it's a family disagreement that escalates because nobody took the time to understand the underlying concerns. Sun Tzu teaches us to ask different questions. Instead of, "How do I win this fight?" we should be asking, "How do I understand this situation so completely that the best path forward becomes obvious to everyone involved?" Instead of, "How do I defeat my opponent?" we should wonder, "How do I create conditions where cooperation becomes more attractive than competition?" This shift in thinking transforms everything. Suddenly, you're not just reacting to circumstances, you're shaping them. You're not just responding to your competition, you're defining the terms of engagement. You're not just solving problems as they arise, you're preventing problems from arising in the first place. The beauty of attack by stratagem is that it's ultimately about creating win-win situations through superior understanding and preparation. When you truly understand all the forces at play, you can often find solutions that benefit everyone involved. That's not weakness. That's the highest form of strength. As we move deeper into Sun Tzu's teachings, keep this foundation in mind. Every principle he shares builds on this fundamental truth. The greatest victories come not from superior force, but from superior thinking. The real art of war is the art of not having to fight at all. Picture this. You're sitting across from me with your favorite coffee in hand, and we're about to dive into one of the most practical chapters Sun Tzu ever wrote. If the previous chapters were about understanding your enemy and knowing yourself, then Tactical Dispositions is where the rubber meets the road. This is where Sun Tzu gets his hands dirty and shows us exactly how to position ourselves for success, whether we're talking about ancient battlefields or modern boardrooms. Sun Tzu opens this chapter with a statement that might surprise you. He says that in ancient times, those skilled in warfare first made themselves invincible, then waited for the enemy to become vulnerable. Now, think about this for a moment. What does it mean to make yourself invincible? It's not about having the biggest army or the most weapons. It's about preparation, positioning, and creating a foundation so solid that defeat becomes nearly impossible. Imagine a chess grandmaster sitting down to play. Before they even make their first move, they've already won half the battle. How? Through years of study, understanding patterns, and developing an intuitive sense of positioning. They've made themselves invincible not through force, but through preparation. This is exactly what Sun Tzu is talking about when he discusses tactical dispositions. The fascinating thing about invincibility, according to Sun Tzu, is that it lies within your own control. You can't force your enemy to make mistakes, but you can absolutely ensure that you're ready when they do. It's like a surfer waiting for the perfect wave. The surfer doesn't create the wave, but they position themselves perfectly to ride it when it comes. They've prepared their skills, chosen the right spot, and maintained the patience to wait for the right moment. This brings us to one of Sun Tzu's most profound insights about winning and losing. He tells us that victory can be discerned, but cannot be manufactured. What does this mean in practical terms? Think about a startup founder who's prepared their business model, assembled a great team, and positioned themselves in the market. They can't force customers to buy, but they can recognize when market conditions are right and move decisively. The preparation creates the possibility. The positioning allows them to recognize and seize the opportunity. Sun Tzu uses a beautiful metaphor here that always gives me chills. He says that one skilled in warfare stands on unshakable ground and never misses the enemy's defeat. Picture a lighthouse keeper during a storm. The lighthouse doesn't create calm seas, but it stands firm on its rocky foundation while ships struggle in the turbulent waters below. The keeper watches, waits, and guides ships to safety when the moment is right. This is the essence of tactical disposition, being so well positioned that you can act with confidence when opportunity presents itself. Now, let's talk about what this looks like in our everyday lives. Consider a job interview. The person who gets hired isn't necessarily the one with the best credentials on paper. It's often the person who's prepared for every possible question, researched the company thoroughly, and positioned themselves as the solution to the employer's problems. They've made themselves invincible through preparation, then recognized and seized the moment when the interviewer revealed what they really needed. Sun Tzu makes another crucial point about the nature of victory and defeat. He says that good warriors are able to secure themselves against defeat, but cannot ensure their enemy's defeat. This might sound pessimistic, but it's actually incredibly empowering. It means that your success is largely in your hands. You can't control market crashes, natural disasters, or your competitor's brilliant new strategy, but you can control how prepared you are to handle whatever comes your way. Think about the restaurants that survived the pandemic. They didn't know a global crisis was coming, but the ones that thrived were those that had already built strong customer relationships, maintained healthy finances, and developed operational flexibility. When the crisis hit, they were positioned to pivot quickly to delivery, outdoor dining, or whatever adaptation was necessary. Their tactical disposition, their preparation and positioning, made them invincible against circumstances that destroyed less prepared competitors. The beauty of Sun Tzu's approach to tactical dispositions is that it's not about aggression or overwhelming force. It's about patience, preparation, and positioning. It's about being like water that finds its way around obstacles, or like a tree that bends in the wind but never breaks because its roots run deep. This principle applies whether you're negotiating a business deal, building a career, or even navigating relationships. The person who succeeds isn't the one who forces outcomes, but the one who prepares thoroughly, positions themselves wisely, and recognizes opportunities when they arise. They've created their own invincibility through discipline and foresight. As we move forward in our exploration of Sun Tzu's wisdom, remember that tactical dispositions aren't just military strategy, they're life strategy. Every day, you have the opportunity to strengthen your position, deepen your preparation, and create the conditions for your own success. The question isn't whether opportunities will come, it's whether you'll be ready when they do. Picture this. You're sitting in your favorite coffee shop, steam rising from your mug, and we're diving into one of the most fascinating chapters of Sun Tzu's ancient masterpiece. Today, we're exploring what he called the use of energy, and I promise you, this isn't about meditation or yoga poses. This is about something far more powerful and practical that can transform how you approach every challenge in your life. When Sun Tzu wrote about energy over 2,000 years ago, he was talking about something we desperately need to understand today. He called it Shy in Chinese, which encompasses momentum, timing, potential force, and the art of positioning yourself to achieve maximum impact with minimum effort. Think about a skilled surfer riding a massive wave. The surfer doesn't create the wave's power, but harnesses it perfectly, using the ocean's own energy to glide effortlessly towards shore. That's exactly what Sun Tzu was teaching us about life's battles, whether they're in ancient warfare or modern boardrooms. Now, imagine you're watching a master chess player. They don't just move pieces randomly across the board. Every move builds potential energy, creates pressure, and sets up future possibilities. Sun Tzu understood that true strategic brilliance comes from accumulating and then releasing energy at precisely the right moment. He compared this to drawing a crossbow. You pull back slowly, steadily, building tension, and then release that stored energy in one decisive moment that can change everything. But here's where it gets really interesting for us modern folks. How many times have you found yourself working incredibly hard but getting nowhere? You're putting in 60-hour weeks, answering emails at midnight, constantly busy, but somehow your career feels stuck. Sun Tzu would say you're expending energy without direction, like trying to push a boulder uphill instead of finding the path where gravity works with you, not against you. The ancient master taught that energy has two essential qualities. It must be concentrated, and it must be timed perfectly. Think about Amazon's Jeff Bezos in the early days. He didn't try to sell everything to everyone immediately. Instead, he concentrated all his energy on books, built momentum there, and then used that success as a launching pad for everything else. That's classic Sun Tzu strategy in action. Bezos understood what the ancient strategist knew. Scattered energy dissipates like water poured on sand, but concentrated energy can cut through mountains. Sun Tzu also wrote about the difference between direct and indirect energy. Direct energy is like a battering ram, powerful but predictable. Indirect energy is like water finding its way around a rock, seemingly gentle, but ultimately irresistible. Consider how Netflix destroyed Blockbuster. They didn't challenge the video rental giant head-on by opening more physical stores. Instead, they used indirect energy, quietly building a mail order system and then streaming technology, while Blockbuster was focused on defending their existing model. By the time Blockbuster realized what was happening, Netflix had already redirected the entire flow of the industry. Now, think about this in your own life. When you're facing a difficult colleague at work, do you always meet their aggression with direct confrontation? Sometimes that's necessary, but Sun Tzu would ask you to consider, where is their energy flowing, and how can you redirect it rather than oppose it directly? Maybe that difficult colleague is passionate about being recognized. Instead of fighting their need for attention, you could channel it toward a project that benefits everyone. You're using their own energy to achieve your goals. The master strategist also emphasized the importance of recognizing when energy is building versus when it's dissipating. In nature, you can feel the electricity in the air before a thunderstorm. Smart generals throughout history have learned to read these signs in human conflicts. In business, this might mean sensing when your industry is ripe for disruption, when your team is ready for a major push, or when market conditions are aligned for your product launch. Here's a story that perfectly illustrates Sun Tzu's teaching. During World War II, the Allies didn't just throw everything they had at the strongest German positions. Instead, they built up massive energy through careful preparation, deception, and coordination. D-Day succeeded not just because of the soldiers' courage, but because months of strategic energy accumulation created an unstoppable force at exactly the right place and time. The Allies had learned Sun Tzu's lesson about gathering energy like a bent bow and releasing it like a triggered crossbow. But energy isn't just about big, dramatic moments. Sun Tzu understood that energy flows in cycles, like breathing in and breathing out. Smart leaders know when to push and when to pause, when to advance and when to consolidate. Think about how the best athletes train. They don't go full intensity every single day because they understand that recovery periods actually build greater energy for when it really matters. The profound wisdom here is that energy is never really created or destroyed, just transformed and redirected. When you're feeling overwhelmed by life's challenges, remember Sun Tzu's teaching. You don't need more energy. You need to use the energy that's already there more skillfully. Like a martial artist who uses an opponent's force against them, the master of energy finds ways to turn obstacles into opportunities. As we close this exploration, consider how you might apply these ancient insights to whatever challenge you're facing right now. Where can you concentrate your energy instead of scattering it? How can you position yourself to ride the waves of change rather than fighting against them? These questions aren't just philosophical. They're practical tools that can transform how you navigate your world. Picture this. You're sitting across from me with your favorite cup of coffee, steam rising between us, and I'm about to share one of the most profound strategic insights ever written. We've been exploring Sun Tzu's timeless wisdom together, and today we're diving into something that could completely change how you see competition, conflict, and even everyday challenges. This is about weak points and strong points, and trust me, once you understand this concept, you'll start seeing the world through entirely different eyes. Now, think about this for a moment. Have you ever watched a martial artist redirect an opponent's force rather than meeting it head-on? Or noticed how water always finds the path of least resistance, eventually carving through solid rock? Sun Tzu understood something fundamental about the nature of strength and weakness that most people completely miss. He wasn't just talking about military strategy when he wrote about identifying vulnerabilities and strengths. He was revealing a universal principle that applies to everything from business negotiations to personal relationships, from career advancement to solving everyday problems. Here's where it gets fascinating. Sun Tzu tells us that all warfare, all conflict really, is based on deception and misdirection. But not the kind of deception you might think. It's about understanding that what appears strong might actually be weak, and what seems weak could be incredibly powerful. Imagine you're facing a competitor in business who seems to have every advantage: bigger budget, more staff, established relationships. Most people would feel intimidated, right? But Sun Tzu would have you look deeper. Where are they overextended? Where are they rigid when they should be flexible? Where are they so confident that they've become complacent? Let me paint you a picture with a modern example. Remember when Netflix was just a DVD by mail service competing against the mighty Blockbuster? On paper, Blockbuster had every advantage: thousands of stores, brand recognition, immediate gratification for customers who wanted movies right now. But Netflix saw. Blockbuster's apparent strength was actually their greatest weakness. All those physical stores? They were expensive anchors that prevented quick adaptation. The immediate gratification model? It was built on late fees that customers secretly resented. Netflix identified these weak points hidden within Blockbuster's strengths and positioned themselves accordingly. They made convenience and customer satisfaction their strong points, attacking where Blockbuster was actually vulnerable despite appearing dominant. Sun Tzu teaches us that the supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. Now, think about this in your own life. How often do you try to win arguments by being louder, or solve problems by working harder in the same way? What if instead you stepped back and asked, where is this situation actually vulnerable? Where can I apply gentle pressure that will create the biggest positive change? The master strategist understood something profound about timing and positioning. He wrote that you should be like water, formless and adaptable, flowing around obstacles rather than crashing against them. But here's the key insight that most people miss. This isn't about being passive or weak yourself. It's about being strategically strong where your opposition is weak, and being strategically absent where they are strong. Consider a fascinating historical example. During World War II, the Allies didn't attack the strongest points of German defense along the Atlantic Wall. Instead, they identified that Normandy, while fortified, was considered less likely as an invasion point by German commanders. The apparent weakness of the location, its distance from major ports and its challenging terrain, became the Allies' strength because it was precisely where the Germans least expected a major assault. The deception wasn't just about fake armies and false radio signals, though those helped. The real genius was recognizing that the enemy's strength in one area created weakness in another. But let's bring this closer to home. Think about your workplace dynamics. Maybe there's a colleague who always dominates meetings with their expertise and confidence. Most people either try to compete directly, which rarely works, or they simply retreat. But what would Sun Tzu suggest? Look for the weak points. Perhaps this person's strength in technical knowledge becomes a weakness when dealing with emotional or interpersonal issues. Perhaps their confidence becomes overconfidence in areas outside their expertise. Your strength might be asking the right questions, building consensus, or translating complex ideas into simple terms. You're not competing on their territory. You're creating your own territory where your natural abilities become decisive advantages. The beautiful thing about understanding weak points and strong points is that it transforms how you approach challenges. Instead of seeing obstacles as immovable walls, you start seeing them as puzzles with hidden solutions. Every system, every person, every situation has both vulnerabilities and strengths. The key is developing the patience and wisdom to observe carefully before acting. Sun Tzu reminds us that knowing yourself and knowing your opposition means you need never fear the result of 100 battles. But knowledge without action is worthless, and action without wisdom is dangerous. The art lies in the careful balance, in knowing when to advance and when to withdraw, when to be visible and when to remain hidden. As we wrap up this exploration of weak points and strong points, remember that this ancient wisdom isn't about manipulation or taking advantage of others. It's about understanding the true nature of strength and finding the most elegant, efficient path to your goals. Sometimes the strongest move is the gentlest one, and sometimes apparent weakness is actually your greatest asset waiting to be recognized. Picture this. You're sitting in your favorite coffee shop, watching people navigate the morning rush. Some dart straight through the crowd, bumping into others and spilling their drinks. Others seem to glide effortlessly, reading the flow of foot traffic, timing their movements perfectly, arriving at their destination calm and collected. This simple observation captures the essence of what Sun Tzu calls maneuvering, the art of movement and flexibility in strategy that can make the difference between victory and disaster. When Sun Tzu wrote about maneuvering 25 centuries ago, he wasn't just talking about moving armies across battlefields. He was describing something far more profound: the ability to adapt, to flow like water around obstacles, and to position yourself advantageously in any competitive situation. Think about this. How often do you find yourself stuck in rigid thinking, pushing harder against resistance instead of finding a more elegant path around it? The ancient Chinese general understood that direct confrontation is often the least efficient way to achieve your goals. Instead, he advocated for what we might call strategic positioning, getting to where you need to be through indirect routes that your opponents don't see coming. It's like that chess master who seems to make random moves until suddenly, 3 moves later, you realize you've been checkmated. The victory wasn't in the final move. It was in the careful positioning that made that final move inevitable. Consider how this plays out in modern business. Netflix didn't defeat Blockbuster by opening better video rental stores. They maneuvered around the entire concept of physical media, positioning themselves in the emerging digital landscape, while Blockbuster was still focused on optimizing their brick-and-mortar operations. By the time Blockbuster realized the battlefield had shifted, Netflix had already claimed the high ground. This is maneuvering at its finest. Not fighting the enemy where they're strong, but creating entirely new terrain where your advantages shine. Sun Tzu emphasizes that successful maneuvering requires what he calls knowledge of the ground. Now, think about this in your own context. Whether you're navigating office politics, launching a startup, or even planning a family vacation, understanding your terrain is crucial. What are the hidden obstacles? Where are the shortcuts that others don't see? Who are the key players, and what motivates them? This isn't about being manipulative. It's about being intelligently aware of your environment. The master strategist also warns us about the dangers of what he calls racing for advantage. Picture 2 drivers speeding to reach a destination first, both taking the same crowded highway. They're burning fuel, wearing down their vehicles, and stressing themselves out, all while a third driver calmly takes a longer but less congested route and arrives first, refreshed and ready to perform. Sometimes the quickest path isn't the fastest one, and sometimes winning the race means choosing a different race altogether. This principle becomes especially relevant when we consider timing. Sun Tzu teaches that there are moments when swift action is essential and moments when patience serves you better. Think of a surfer waiting for the perfect wave. They don't paddle frantically at every small swell. They position themselves correctly and wait for the wave that will carry them effortlessly to shore. In our always-on, instant gratification culture, this kind of strategic patience feels almost revolutionary. The art of maneuvering also involves what Sun Tzu calls making the distant near and the near distant. This sounds mystical, but it's actually quite practical. It means controlling perception and expectation. When Apple announces a product months before it's available, they're making the distant near, creating anticipation and desire for something that doesn't yet exist. Conversely, when a company quietly develops a game-changing technology without fanfare, they're making the near distant, keeping competitors unaware of an imminent threat. One of the most powerful aspects of maneuvering is its emphasis on flexibility over force. Water doesn't fight the rock, it flows around it, and given enough time, it reshapes the entire landscape. This isn't about being weak or passive. It's about being smart. Consider how Martin Luther King Jr. maneuvered during the Civil Rights Movement. Rather than meeting violence with violence, he chose the terrain of moral authority, forcing his opponents to reveal their true nature on television screens across America. The battlefield he chose transformed the entire conflict. Sun Tzu also understood that maneuvering requires excellent communication and coordination. A jazz ensemble provides a beautiful metaphor here. Each musician knows their part, but they're constantly listening, adapting, and responding to subtle cues from their fellow players. The magic happens not when everyone follows a rigid script, but when they're so well prepared and attuned that they can improvise together seamlessly. This is the kind of fluid responsiveness that effective maneuvering demands. As we wrap up our exploration of this timeless wisdom, remember that maneuvering isn't about being sneaky or underhanded. It's about being thoughtful, adaptive, and strategically creative. It's about recognizing that the obvious path isn't always the best path, and that sometimes the most powerful move is the one your opposition never sees coming. Whether you're building a career, growing a business, or simply trying to live more effectively, the principles of maneuvering offer a sophisticated alternative to the exhausting cycle of head-to-head competition that defines so much of modern life. Picture this. You're sitting across from a friend who just asked you the most important question about strategy you've ever heard. They lean forward with their coffee and say, "How do you know when to stick to the plan and when to throw it all out the window?" That question, my friend, is exactly what Sun Tzu tackles in his brilliant chapter on variation in tactics, and it's probably the most practical wisdom you'll ever encounter about adapting to life's curveballs. Now, think about this for a moment. How many times have you watched someone stubbornly stick to a plan that clearly wasn't working? Maybe it was a business strategy that ignored changing market conditions, or a friend who kept using the same approach in relationships despite repeated failures. Sun Tzu understood something profound about human nature and success. The ability to adapt isn't just useful, it's absolutely essential for survival and victory. The ancient Chinese military strategist opens this discussion with a deceptively simple observation that there are certain standard maneuvers and formations that every commander should know. These are your fundamentals, your basic toolkit. But here's where it gets fascinating, and where Sun Tzu's genius really shines through. He immediately follows this by explaining that these standard approaches should never become rigid dogma. Instead, they're like a jazz musician's scales, essential to master, but meant to be improvised upon when the moment demands it. Consider this vivid example from Sun Tzu's own time. Imagine you're a general approaching a mountain pass. The textbook says to secure the high ground first, establish supply lines, then advance methodically. But what if your scouts report that the enemy is retreating in chaos, leaving their treasury unguarded in the valley below? A rigid commander follows the manual and loses the opportunity. A wise commander recognizes that sometimes you must abandon the perfect tactical position to seize an unexpected strategic advantage. This principle translates beautifully into our modern world. Think about Netflix, which started by mailing DVDs to customers. When streaming technology emerged, they could have stuck to their proven business model, their standard formation, if you will. Instead, they recognized the changing battlefield of entertainment and completely reinvented themselves. Companies that failed to make similar adaptations, like Blockbuster, became cautionary tales about the dangers of tactical rigidity. Sun Tzu emphasizes that the key to successful variation lies in understanding what he calls the 5 dangerous faults that can affect a leader's judgment. Now, these aren't just military concerns. They're deeply human weaknesses that show up everywhere from boardrooms to family dinner tables. There's recklessness, which leads to destruction. There's cowardice, which leads to capture. There's a hasty temper, which can be provoked by insults. There's a delicacy of honor, which is sensitive to shame. And there's over-solicitude for people, which exposes you to worry and trouble. Here's where this gets really interesting for us today. Let's say you're negotiating a major deal at work. Your natural inclination might be to stick to your prepared talking points, but what happens when your counterpart throws you a curveball? If you're too reckless, you might agree to terms that hurt you later. If you're too cautious, you might miss a genuine opportunity for mutual benefit. If your pride gets wounded by their initial lowball offer, you might storm out and lose everything. The wisdom lies in recognizing these emotional traps and adapting your approach accordingly. Sun Tzu tells us something profound about terrain and circumstances that applies far beyond ancient battlefields. He explains that there are roads which mustn't be followed, armies which mustn't be attacked, towns which mustn't be besieged, positions which mustn't be contested, and commands from the sovereign which mustn't be obeyed. Now, that last one might sound shocking, but think about what he's really saying. Sometimes the person giving you orders, whether it's your boss, your partner, or even your own initial plan, doesn't have the complete picture that you do in the moment. This reminds me of a story about a young manager I once knew who received explicit instructions from headquarters to cut costs by 20% across all departments. The directive was clear and non-negotiable, or so it seemed. But when she looked at her situation more carefully, she realized that cutting the customer service team would actually cost the company far more in lost business than the savings would generate. Instead of blindly following orders, she presented an alternative plan that achieved the cost savings through efficiency improvements rather than layoffs. Her willingness to vary from the standard directive not only saved jobs, but actually improved the company's bottom line. The heart of Sun Tzu's teaching here is about developing what we might call contextual intelligence. It's the ability to read the room, to sense when the winds are shifting, and to adjust your sails accordingly. This doesn't mean being wishy-washy or inconsistent. Rather, it means being so grounded in your principles and so clear about your ultimate objectives that you can be flexible about the methods you use to achieve them. As we wrap up this exploration of tactical variation, remember that Sun Tzu isn't advocating for chaos or constant change for its own sake. He's teaching us to be like water, which always finds its way around obstacles while never losing its essential nature. The next time you find yourself facing an unexpected challenge, ask yourself, what would happen if I adapted my approach while staying true to my deeper purpose? That question might just unlock the strategic breakthrough you've been seeking. Picture this. You're sitting across from me with your favorite cup of coffee, steam rising between us, and I'm about to share something that could completely change how you think about leadership, teamwork, and navigating the complexities of modern life. We've been exploring Sun Tzu's timeless wisdom together, and today we're diving into one of the most practical chapters of the art of war, the army on the march. Now, don't let the military terminology fool you. This isn't just about ancient Chinese warfare. This is about how to lead people through challenging terrain, both literally and metaphorically. Imagine you're the CEO of a startup, or maybe you're leading a project team at work, or perhaps you're simply trying to guide your family through a difficult transition. Sun Tzu's insights about moving an army safely and effectively through dangerous territory apply directly to these modern situations. The fundamental question he's addressing is this: how do you keep your people safe, motivated, and unified when you're all moving through uncertain and potentially hostile environments? Sun Tzu begins with something that might surprise you. He talks about reading the landscape, not just the physical terrain, but what we might call the emotional and strategic landscape of any situation. He observes that when you see birds suddenly take flight from a forest, there are likely enemy forces hidden below. When dust rises in high, straight columns, vehicles are approaching. When it spreads low and wide, infantry is on the move. Now, think about this in your own life. What are the modern equivalents of these birds taking flight? Maybe it's when your usually chatty colleague suddenly goes quiet during meetings. Something's brewing. Perhaps it's when customer complaints start spiking in a particular area. There's trouble you haven't seen yet. The genius of Sun Tzu lies in his understanding that leadership is fundamentally about observation and adaptation. He teaches us to read the subtle signs that others miss. In today's business world, this might mean noticing when your team's energy shifts during a project, recognizing the early warning signs of market changes, or sensing when office dynamics are about to explode into conflict. The leader who survives and thrives is the one who sees these signals first and responds appropriately. But here's where it gets really interesting. Sun Tzu doesn't just talk about external threats. He spends considerable time discussing internal challenges. He warns about the dangers of an army that's too comfortable, too fearful, or too divided. Think about your own experiences leading teams or groups. Have you ever noticed how success can make people complacent? How fear can paralyze decision-making? How internal conflicts can tear apart even the most talented groups? Sun Tzu saw these patterns over 2,000 years ago, and they're just as relevant today. He offers this profound insight. Treat your soldiers as you would treat your own beloved children. When they're sick, care for them. When they're afraid, reassure them. When they've done well, celebrate them. But, and here's the crucial balance, when they need discipline, provide it firmly and fairly. This isn't about being a pushover or a tyrant. It's about being a leader who genuinely cares for their people while maintaining the authority necessary to keep everyone safe and moving toward the objective. Consider how this applies to modern management. The best leaders I've known embody this principle perfectly. They'll fight tooth and nail to get their team members raises. They'll shield them from unreasonable demands from above, and they'll invest in their professional development. But they'll also have the difficult conversations when someone isn't performing, make the tough decisions when necessary, and maintain clear expectations and boundaries. This creates what Sun Tzu calls mutual confidence. Your people trust you to have their backs, and you trust them to have yours. Sun Tzu also emphasizes the critical importance of maintaining morale during difficult journeys. He understood that an army's spirit could be more important than its weapons. When people are tired, discouraged, or losing faith in the mission, even the best strategy can fall apart. How many promising projects have you seen fail not because of poor planning or insufficient resources, but because the team simply lost heart? The ancient general provides practical wisdom for these moments. Keep your people informed about what's happening and why. Don't sugarcoat serious challenges, but help them understand how their current struggles fit into the larger picture. Celebrate small victories along the way. Make sure basic needs are met. People can't focus on the mission if they're worried about fundamental security. And perhaps most importantly, model the attitude and behavior you want to see from others. Now, think about this. How often do we see leaders today who violate these principles? They keep their teams in the dark about company direction. They ignore early warning signs of problems. They fail to address internal conflicts, or they lose credibility by being either too harsh or too permissive. Sun Tzu would recognize these failures immediately because human nature hasn't changed in over 2 millennia. As we wrap up our exploration of the Army on the March, remember that Sun Tzu isn't just giving us military tactics. He's providing a masterclass in situational awareness, adaptive leadership, and the delicate art of keeping people united and motivated when the path forward is uncertain. Whether you're leading a Fortune 500 company, managing a small team, or simply trying to guide your family through life's challenges, these insights remain as powerful and relevant today as they were in ancient China. The terrain may have changed, but the fundamental principles of wise leadership remain eternal. Picture this. You're sitting across from an old friend who happens to be one of history's greatest military strategists, and he's about to share something that will completely change how you think about your environment. That's exactly what Sun Tzu does when he talks about terrain. And trust me, this isn't just about mountains and valleys. This is about understanding the ground you're standing on in every aspect of your life. Now think about this for a moment. When you walk into a new office, a networking event, or even a family gathering, what's the first thing you instinctively do? You scan the room, right? You're unconsciously reading the terrain. Sun Tzu would nod approvingly because he understood something profound. The environment shapes everything. It determines who has the advantage, who's vulnerable, and most importantly, what strategies will actually work. Sun Tzu breaks down terrain into 6 distinct types, and here's where it gets fascinating. He's not just describing physical landscapes, he's giving us a framework for understanding any competitive environment. The first type he calls accessible ground. This is terrain that both you and your opponent can move through easily. Think about a completely open market where anyone can enter and compete. The smartphone industry before Apple revolutionized it, or the coffee shop business in most neighborhoods. On accessible ground, Sun Tzu tells us, whoever gets there first and positions themselves well has the advantage. It's like claiming the best spot at a farmer's market. You want to be where the foot traffic naturally flows. But then there's entangling ground, and oh, this is where things get tricky. This is terrain that's easy to enter, but difficult to leave. Picture a startup that burns through its funding too quickly, or someone who takes on too much debt to maintain a lifestyle. You can get in easily, but extracting yourself becomes a nightmare. Sun Tzu warns us that on entangling ground, you better be absolutely certain you can win quickly. Because if you can't, you're going to find yourself in a very uncomfortable position with limited options. Now, let me tell you about temporizing ground, because this one shows up everywhere in modern life. This is terrain where neither side has a clear advantage, where making the first move might actually hurt you. Think about those tense negotiations where whoever speaks first loses leverage, or market situations where early movers get punished while patient observers thrive. Sun Tzu's advice here is brilliant in its simplicity. Don't take the bait. If your opponent is trying to lure you into unfavorable action on temporizing ground, resist the urge to act. Sometimes the most powerful move is the one you don't make. The fourth type, narrow ground, is absolutely fascinating when you apply it to today's world. This is terrain with natural choke points, places where numbers don't matter as much as position. Think about how a small, specialized company can compete with giants by controlling a narrow but crucial niche. I remember reading about a tiny software company that became indispensable to major airlines not by trying to do everything, but by perfecting one small but critical function that everyone needed. They found their narrow ground and defended it brilliantly. Precipitous ground is where Sun Tzu gets almost poetic. This is terrain where you're fighting uphill, literally or figuratively. But here's his counterintuitive insight. Sometimes being on the high ground means you should stay put and let others come to you. But sometimes it means you need to strike fast and hard while you have the advantage. Consider how established companies often have the high ground of brand recognition and resources, but they can become complacent. Meanwhile, hungry startups on the lower ground move with desperate speed and innovation. The key is recognizing which type of precipitous ground you're on. Then there's distant ground, and this might be the most relevant concept for our globally connected world. When you're operating far from your base of support, whether that's launching a product in a foreign market or taking on a role outside your expertise, everything becomes more challenging and expensive. Sun Tzu understood that distance amplifies every difficulty. your communication lines get stretched, your resources become more precious, and your margin for error shrinks dramatically. But here's where Sun Tzu's genius really shines through. He doesn't just describe these terrains, he shows us how to read them in real time. He talks about observing the subtle signs that reveal the true nature of your environment. Are your competitors acting desperate or confident? Are resources flowing freely or becoming scarce? Is the ground shifting beneath everyone's feet? These observations aren't just military intelligence, they're life intelligence. Consider how this applies to career decisions. That dream job might look like accessible ground, easy to enter, but what if it's actually entangling ground where people get stuck for years? Or maybe that challenging project everyone's avoiding is actually precipitous ground where you could gain a commanding advantage by tackling it successfully. Sun Tzu also understood something we often forget in our rush to act. Terrain changes. What looks like favorable ground today might become treacherous tomorrow. Markets shift, technologies evolve, relationships change. The wise strategist doesn't just read the current terrain, they anticipate how it might transform. As we move deeper into Sun Tzu's strategic wisdom, remember that understanding terrain isn't about becoming paranoid or overly calculating. It's about developing the awareness to see your environment clearly, to recognize the opportunities and constraints that shape your possibilities. Because once you truly understand the ground you're standing on, you can finally start making moves that work with the landscape instead of against it. You know, there's something magical about how Sun Tzu could look at a battlefield and see not just soldiers and terrain, but an intricate web of human psychology and strategic possibility. As we settle into this next chapter of the art of war, imagine you're sitting across from an ancient general who's about to share one of his most profound insights over our morning coffee. He's going to walk us through what he calls the 9 situations. And trust me, this isn't just military theory. This is a masterclass in reading the room, whether that room is a boardroom, a family dinner, or yes, an actual battlefield. Picture this: you're playing chess, but instead of a standard board, you're playing on 9 completely different surfaces. One game is on ice, another in quicksand, one on a mountaintop, another in a maze. Each surface demands a totally different approach, doesn't it? That's essentially what Sun Tzu discovered about conflict and competition. He realized that context isn't just important, context is everything. The first situation he describes is what he calls dispersive ground. This is when your team is fighting on their home turf, close to their families and comfortable surroundings. Now, think about this for a moment. You might assume home field advantage is always good, right? But Sun Tzu saw something counterintuitive. When people are too close to comfort, when they can practically see their front door from the battlefield, their minds wander. They're thinking about dinner plans, about whether they locked the house, about 1,000 little distractions. It's like trying to work from home when Netflix is right there calling your name. The proximity to comfort becomes a weakness, not a strength. Then there's what he calls facile ground. Territory that's easy to move through, but offers no real strategic advantage. This is the business equivalent of those meetings that everyone attends, but nobody really needs to be in. You can navigate these situations easily, but they don't move the needle. Sun Tzu's advice? Don't linger. Don't get comfortable in spaces that don't serve your larger purpose. Keep moving toward terrain that actually matters. But here's where it gets really interesting. Sun Tzu talks about contentious ground, those hotly contested spaces where everyone wants to be first. Think about the early days of social media platforms or the rush to dominate emerging markets. His insight is brilliant. Sometimes the prize everyone's fighting for isn't worth the fight. Sometimes While everyone else is scrambling for the obvious prize, the real opportunity lies in the space nobody's paying attention to. It's like watching people fight over the last piece of cake while you quietly grab the entire dessert tray that everyone ignored. The concept of open ground fascinated me when I first encountered it. This is terrain where you can move freely, but so can everyone else. It's a level playing field, which sounds fair, but Sun Tzu warns us that fairness isn't always your friend in competitive situations. When everyone has equal access, success comes down to execution, timing, and often pure audacity. It's like those moments in business when a new technology becomes available to everyone simultaneously. The winner isn't necessarily the biggest company or the one with the most resources, but the one who moves fastest and most decisively. Now, imagine finding yourself in what Sun Tzu calls serious ground. This is when you've penetrated deep into unfamiliar territory, far from your comfort zone, with no easy way back. Your startup has burned through most of its funding, or you've committed to a career change that requires you to prove yourself in an entirely new field. Here's what's counterintuitive. This apparent vulnerability can become your greatest strength. When retreat isn't really an option, people discover reserves of creativity and determination they never knew they had. There's something about having your back against the wall that clarifies priorities wonderfully. The most chilling situation Sun Tzu describes is encircled ground, when you're surrounded, cut off from support, facing what seems like certain defeat. But even here, his wisdom shines through. He observes that people fight most fiercely when they believe they have nothing left to lose. It's the psychological principle behind some of history's most stunning comebacks. Think about companies that were written off as dead but somehow reinvented themselves completely, or athletes who came back from career-ending injuries to achieve their greatest victories. Perhaps the most profound insight comes with what he calls death ground, situations where survival itself is at stake. Sun Tzu noticed something remarkable. When people truly believe they're fighting for their lives, they often discover capabilities they never knew existed. It's not that he's advocating for putting people in life or death situations, but rather recognizing that the human spirit has an incredible capacity to rise when everything is on the line. What makes this ancient wisdom so relevant today is that we encounter these 9 situations constantly, just in different forms. That job interview where you feel completely out of your depth? That's unfamiliar ground. The family argument where everyone's dug into their positions? That's contentious ground. The moment when you realize you've committed to something with no clear exit strategy. Welcome to serious ground. The genius of Sun Tzu's framework isn't just in identifying these situations. It's in helping us recognize that each one requires a completely different mindset and strategy. As we move forward in our exploration of the art of war, keep these 9 situations in mind. They're not just military concepts. They're a lens for understanding the terrain of human conflict and competition in all its forms. Picture this. You're sitting across from an ancient Chinese general who's about to share one of the most devastating tactical secrets in military history. That general is Sun Tzu, and today we're diving into one of his most intense chapters, the attack by fire. Now, grab your coffee because this isn't just about literal flames on ancient battlefields. This is about understanding how to leverage the most powerful forces around you, whether you're fighting a war, building a business, or navigating the complex battles of modern life. Sun Tzu begins this chapter with a chilling observation that fire, when used strategically, doesn't just destroy enemy resources, it destroys their will to fight. Think about this for a moment. When you see your supplies burning, your escape routes cut off by flames, something primal happens in your mind. It's not just the physical damage that defeats you. It's the psychological terror of watching everything you depend on turn to ash. But here's where Sun Tzu gets really interesting. He doesn't just say, burn everything down. Instead, he outlines 5 specific types of fire attacks, each as calculated as a chess master's opening moves. There's burning personnel, burning supplies, burning equipment, burning arsenals, and burning transportation routes. Each serves a different strategic purpose, and timing is absolutely everything. Now, you might be wondering how this applies to your Monday morning board meeting, right? Well, consider this modern parallel. When Netflix decided to shift from DVDs to streaming, they essentially launched a fire attack on their own business model. They burned their old way of doing things before their competitors could adapt. They understood that sometimes you have to destroy what you have to create what you need. That's pure Sun Tzu thinking, using environmental forces and timing to create an unstoppable advantage. Sun Tzu emphasizes that successful fire attacks depend entirely on environmental conditions. You can't just decide to use fire whenever you feel like it. The wind has to be right, the weather has to cooperate, and the timing has to be perfect. He talks about how certain days and lunar phases create optimal conditions for fire attacks. This isn't superstition, it's meteorological warfare based on centuries of observation. This principle translates beautifully to modern business strategy. Think about how Steve Jobs launched the iPhone. He didn't just create a great product, he waited for the perfect environmental conditions. The technology was ready, consumer frustration with existing phones was at its peak, and the market was primed for disruption. Like Sun Tzu's fire attacks, it wasn't just about having the weapon. It was about deploying it when conditions guaranteed maximum impact. But here's what makes Sun Tzu truly brilliant. He warns against the intoxication of destructive power. Fire, he reminds us, is a double-edged sword. Use it carelessly, and you'll burn yourself along with your enemy. He tells commanders that anger should never drive the decision to attack with fire. Hot emotions and literal fire make for catastrophic combinations. Consider how this wisdom applies to our digital age. Social media gives everyone the power to launch fire attacks against competitors, critics, or anyone who annoys us. But Sun Tzu would caution against Twitter wars and viral takedowns driven by emotion. He'd remind us that reputation, like fire, spreads quickly and burns everything in its path, including the person who lit the match. The chapter also reveals Sun Tzu's deep understanding of psychological warfare. When enemy soldiers see their camps burning, they don't just lose supplies, they lose confidence in their leadership's ability to protect them. Modern corporate leaders understand this principle when they strategically announce layoffs or office closures. The message isn't just about cost-cutting, it's about demonstrating decisive action that can either terrify competitors or reassure investors. Sun Tzu provides fascinating tactical details about coordinating fire attacks with conventional assaults. The fire creates chaos and confusion, but you still need disciplined troops ready to exploit the advantage. It's like a perfectly orchestrated symphony of destruction where timing, coordination, and follow-through determine success or failure. This coordination principle shows up everywhere in modern life. When Amazon launches a new service, they don't just announce it and hope for the best. They coordinate marketing campaigns, infrastructure improvements, and strategic partnerships to create maximum impact. The announcement is the fire attack, but the coordinated follow-up ensures they capture the territory they've softened up. Perhaps most importantly, Sun Tzu emphasizes that fire attacks require absolute commitment. Once you light that fire, there's no taking it back. You have to be prepared for the consequences, both intended and unintended. This is why he spends so much time discussing when not to use fire attacks. Sometimes the environmental conditions aren't right. Sometimes the strategic benefit doesn't justify the risk. And sometimes patience serves you better than aggression. As we wrap up this exploration of Sun Tzu's fire tactics, remember that his core message transcends literal flames. He's teaching us about leveraging powerful environmental forces, timing our moves perfectly, and understanding that the most devastating attacks often come from unexpected directions. Whether you're launching a startup, negotiating a deal, or simply trying to create positive change in your community, Sun Tzu's fire attack principles remind us that success isn't just about having good ideas. It's about deploying those ideas when conditions guarantee they'll spread like wildfire. Next time, we'll explore how Sun Tzu approaches the delicate art of espionage and intelligence gathering. Because as he reminds us, the best battles are won before they're ever fought. Welcome back to One Book, One Coffee, where we're diving deep into Sun Tzu's timeless masterpiece, The Art of War. Pour yourself that perfect cup, settle in, and let's explore what might be the most intriguing chapter of this ancient text, the use of spies. Now, before you start picturing James Bond or elaborate espionage thrillers, let me tell you something fascinating about this final chapter. Sun Tzu saves his most profound insights about information and intelligence for last, and there's a brilliant reason for that. Picture this. You're sitting across from an old general, someone who's seen countless battles, and after sharing all his tactical wisdom, he leans forward and says, "But here's the real secret to victory." That's exactly what Sun Tzu does here. He spent 12 chapters teaching us about positioning, timing, and strategy. But now he reveals the foundation that makes everything else possible: knowing what your opponent is thinking before they even think it themselves. Sun Tzu opens this chapter with a statement that's as relevant today as it was 2,500 years ago. All warfare is based on deception. But here's where it gets really interesting. He's not just talking about lying to your enemies. He's talking about the fundamental importance of information asymmetry. Think about this for a moment. In any competitive situation, whether it's business, sports, or even dating, the person with better information usually wins. The startup that understands their market better than their competitors, the athlete who studied their opponent's weaknesses, the person who knows what their crush actually enjoys doing on weekends. Information is power. And Sun Tzu understood this long before the internet made data the new oil. But Sun Tzu takes this concept much deeper. He identifies 5 types of spies, and this is where his genius really shines. There are local spies, people from the enemy's own territory who can blend in seamlessly. There are internal spies, officials within the enemy's organization who can be turned or bought. There are converted spies, enemy agents who've been captured and flipped to work for you instead. There are expendable spies, who are fed false information that they'll inevitably reveal under torture or pressure. And finally, there are living spies, your most valuable assets, who return with crucial intelligence. Now, you might be thinking, this sounds pretty ruthless, and you'd be right. But here's what's fascinating about Sun Tzu's approach. He's not advocating for cruelty or unnecessary harm. Instead, he's making a profound economic argument. He calculates the cost of maintaining an army of 100,000 men and compares it to the relatively tiny expense of maintaining a network of spies. The math is staggering. You can feed, house, and pay informants for a fraction of what it costs to maintain military forces. More importantly, good intelligence can end conflicts quickly, saving countless lives on both sides. This principle translates beautifully to modern business. Consider how companies like Amazon or Google invest heavily in data analytics and market research. They're essentially running sophisticated intelligence operations, gathering information about consumer behavior, competitor strategies, and market trends. A well-timed product launch based on superior market intelligence can be worth more than years of expensive advertising campaigns. The startup that understands their customers' real pain points before their competitors do has an almost insurmountable advantage. But Sun Tzu's most brilliant insight about espionage isn't tactical, it's psychological. He emphasizes that the general who employs spies must be extraordinarily wise and benevolent. Why? Because managing human intelligence requires understanding human nature at its deepest level. You need to know what motivates people, what they fear, what they desire. You need to be able to inspire loyalty while also recognizing betrayal. It's a delicate dance of trust and suspicion that requires remarkable emotional intelligence. Think about the best managers or leaders you've known. They probably had an almost supernatural ability to read people, to understand what was really going on beneath the surface of office politics or team dynamics. They knew who was struggling before that person even admitted it to themselves. They could sense when someone was considering leaving for another job. This isn't magic. It's applied psychology combined with systematic information gathering. Sun Tzu also warns about the dangers of poor intelligence. False information is worse than no information at all because it leads to catastrophically wrong decisions. How many businesses have failed because they misread market signals? How many relationships have ended because someone acted on incomplete or misleading information? The dot-com bubble, the housing crisis, even personal misunderstandings that destroy friendships. Often these disasters stem from acting confidently on bad intelligence. Perhaps most importantly, Sun Tzu emphasizes that intelligence gathering must be continuous and systematic. It's not enough to gather information once and assume it remains valid. Markets change, people change, circumstances evolve. The general who relies on outdated intelligence is as vulnerable as one who has no intelligence at all. As we wrap up our exploration of this final chapter, consider how these ancient principles apply to your own life. Whether you're navigating office politics, making investment decisions, or even planning a surprise party, the quality of your information often determines the quality of your outcomes. Sun Tzu reminds us that in any competitive environment, knowledge isn't just power, it's the difference between victory and defeat. Next time, we'll step back and examine how all these principles from the art of war come together to form a complete philosophy of strategic thinking. Until then, keep your eyes open, your ears listening, and remember that sometimes the most important battles are won before they're ever fought. In The Art of War, Sun Tzu presents timeless wisdom on strategy, leadership, and the nature of conflict. The book emphasizes the importance of preparation, adaptability, and understanding both oneself and the enemy. As you navigate through life's battles, whether in business or personal pursuits, these principles can guide you toward victory and success. Here are some key takeaways. 1. Know yourself and know your enemy. To achieve any victory, it's crucial to have a deep understanding of your capabilities and those of your opponent. Start incredibly small by reflecting on your strengths and weaknesses. Consider how you can leverage your skills and knowledge in various situations. 2. The element of surprise. Using unpredictability to your advantage can turn the tide in your favor. In practice, approach challenges from unexpected angles or introduce new tactics in your strategies. Be patient with yourself as you learn and adapt to new methods. 3. The art of timing. Patience and the ability to strike at the right moment are critical. Whether you're pursuing a new venture or making a crucial decision, wait for the most opportune moment to act. Trust your instincts and be mindful of the circumstances. 4. Resource management. Efficient use of resources often determines success. Analyze the resources at your disposal and think creatively about how to maximize their potential. Start small by optimizing one area of your life or work, and gradually expand this practice. 5. Adaptability and flexibility. The ability to adjust your plans and respond to changing circumstances is vital. Embrace change and be willing to pivot when necessary. Start by practicing flexibility in minor decisions and work towards greater adaptability in larger aspects of your life. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below with at least one idea from this book that stuck with you. One concept you're going to carry forward. It could be something that challenged your thinking, something you want to try, or even something you disagreed with. Your insight might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today. And if this summary gave you something valuable, a new perspective, a spark of motivation, or even just a peaceful hour with your coffee, share it with someone who might need it too. Subscribe to One Book, One Coffee, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a new summary. Every week, we sit down together with one great book, one warm cup of coffee, and the simple belief that wisdom, shared well, can change lives. Until next time, keep reading, keep growing, and remember, every small step counts. See you at the next book.